Greetings, Earthlings. Welcome to the channel. We do a lot of Beamer stuff on here, but we also do other vehicles. If you're new, thanks for joining us. If the short brought you here, it's because of the transmission flush, which I will show first. But there's plenty of good tips to come within this video that will help you get that transmission installed in your vehicle and not have any problems afterwards. All right, I'm going to try to keep it as brief and, as detail-filled as possible. It's a messy setup. It kind of leaks and stuff, but it's just a bunch of scrap hoses. Here's the line as it goes into the transmission, and here's the other one up here. I just got a bunch of scrap hoses and stuff that I had laying around. I made sure they were clean first, and I hooked up the cooler clean to it, and I'm collecting most of what comes out, most of it. Some of it is just, falling out because of leaks, but afterwards I'll show you guys what I'm going to do with the cooler clean stuff. I'm glad it's starting to come out clear now. This is like the fourth can, okay? This transmission had a torque converter failure, so it definitely put some stuff into the cooler that shouldn't be left in there. So I'm pushing the cooler clean in, and we'll see it start oozing out here in just a second. There it is. So, and yeah, it's leaking. Oh yeah, it's just leaking everywhere, but we're collecting most of it. As you can see, kind of comes out in a foam, and that is what's gonna bring all the crap that's way up there in the cooler into this bottle, okay? I could really be bothered. I can't be bothered about this stuff leaking a little bit with trying to film a video and stuff like that too, so I'm sure there's a better way to set this up so it doesn't leak and stuff, but hey, we're almost done, all right? The first two bottles didn't leak any, I promise. Anyway, another good tip, other than flushing the cooler like this, and collecting it, is over on the other side, I have a funnel and a piece of paper towel, and I'll show you guys what I did with it. I was collecting this stuff and then pouring it through the paper towel and then examining it to see if it was still contaminated or not. So this is looking a lot better now. So you let it settle for a while and the bubbles will go away, but you want to make sure that there's not a whole bunch of metal and debris floating in that, and then you'll be okay. The other thing is I have one of those little hand pumps that you can put in a quart of like diff oil, and that's usually what I use it for, but I'm going to clean it up, and I'm going to pump some ATF through as well. And just so, I can force out the cooler clean. You can do it with air, but I'd rather do it with fluid. Another good tip while we're under here is replacing the rear main seal. Now, it may take special tools to do it. You want to be very careful not to nick the crankshaft. Your bolts may be one-time use. You want to mark everything and label it like for direction, so you don't install it backwards when you're going back together. And really, really important that you don't nick the crankshaft or scratch the crankshaft when you take the rear main seal out. This one luckily goes on with a housing. You can buy it either way, just a seal, which is cheaper if you have the tool to take it out and install it, or you can get it in the complete housing, and I'll show you guys that right now. Hang on one sec while I get out from underneath here. I don't have a lift, so we're on the ground. Okay, while we're talking about the cooler clean though, let me finish showing you guys that. Pardon the mess. Got too many jobs going on. So here's a funnel, and here's just like a blue shop towel, and I've been pouring the fluid through this. And if you look really carefully, you can see there's a little bit of debris and a little bit of metal in there. So that's why I decided to flush it out more, just because of that little bit of stuff. It may not hurt anything, but I don't want to take the chance. This customer really needs help right now, and we're really trying to help him get through it. Okay, so moving on from that, here's the little hand pump I was telling you about. I got to clean it up a bit. It's got gear oil in it. You don't want to put that into automatic transmission. Here's the rear main seal. It comes with this little installer tool. And this is the old one, kind of brittle, okay, which is why it's a good idea to replace it. Comes with a tool like this, so you can put this end on the crankshaft. And then when you push this seal down, then the tool sort of just pops through like that, and it just helps it get onto the crankshaft without damage. All right, using the proper fluid is a plus, obviously. And this stuff right here, LubeGuard synthetic protectant. This is good for the fluid. Lots of professionals swear by this stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that in there with an OE filter and the installation kit. We're doing the Guibo, which is on the drive shaft on these BMW vehicles. Exhaust gaskets, and then the cooler O-rings. We may also replace the shifter shaft seal, but yeah, take a look at this Guibo. So good idea to replace these on the Beamer people, all right? You look at how it looks when you flex it. Without flexing it, it looks okay. Well, what do you think happens when it's under load? It may flex a little, right? So good idea to replace these, especially the front one, because I've seen it where they fail and they can actually whip the drive shaft around and break the case of the transmission. So that's good to know. All right, so rear main seal covered, the filter, the kit, all the little fixins, straining the fluid that you collect from cleaning the cooler, all very good things to do. And then let me go back over here. We're going to change the transfer case oil. There is the old transmission and there is the new used transmission, sort of new. We got that from LKQ. Again, this is to do with the customer's budget. This is what we got to do to get them back on the road. And so we're just doing what we can to help them. Tips for you guys. Reconditioned or a new torque converter. This goes between the engine and the transmission. So does the seal. So does the rear main seal. All right. So these are good things to replace while it's out. This is the front pump seal, or the torque converter seal, I should say. It goes right there. All right. Really important that you replace these things, because it may not have been leaking, or like on your new one, it may not show signs of leaking, but you put it all together and now you're putting a different torque converter in it. Let's say you nick it a little bit and this thing was brittle, it's going to start pouring fluid everywhere. So it's a good idea to replace that front pump seal, the torque converter, rear main seal. Good idea to service the transmission. Unless it's really far gone, then the friction material is floating in the transmission fluid, and that helps it kind of get by without slipping too much. That happens, but, I always change the fluid. I advise the customers of the risk, but I always find it, so far I haven't had any bad results, knock on wood. But, you might. So be careful about it. Check that fluid, what's coming out of that transmission, and see what's in that pan before you put it up in the vehicle. Another good thing to know is that some vehicles, especially newer vehicles, not this one because the TCM is not inside this transmission, but like the ZFs, there's a ZF TCM right there. It actually goes on the valve body. I have a couple videos about that valve body and that transmission. Check them out and see what you think. But if you have the TCM in the transmission, especially on a BMW, it may require programming for that used transmission to work in your vehicle. So that is something that you want to research before you get this far into the job. So if you do it all, and it's going to require either someone coming by that has the capability to do the programming, or towing the vehicle somewhere to have it programmed when you're done swapping it in. Another good thing to know about this is when you're installing the torque converter, especially a reconditioned one or a new one, make sure you put fluid in it, okay? There's also a stator one-way clutch in some torque converters, and actually most of them. And so it should turn one way and not the other, and it's down inside there. The other thing is you want to make sure that the torque converter is fully seated. If you see that little cutout there and this little cutout there, there's two notches that protrude down inside the pump of the transmission. Let me see if I could show them to you guys real quick. It's really important. Yeah, there's one on top right there, and then the other one on the bottom. You can put something in there when you take the seal out to replace it and get it, positioned at, like, say, a 12-6 position. So you know where it is when you're feeding the torque converter in. And you should feel these multiple steps, 1, 2, and you'll know it when it goes poop and it seats into those lugs. You'll feel it. All right, so make sure that it's seated all the way. So another good thing to do is, if you have an inspection hole before you pull the tranny out, is take a measurement of how far in the torque converter is seated. maybe mark it even. And then that way you can double check once you put it up. Before you put everything on, you can double check that that torque converter is all the way seated. All right. Real quick, fun story. I rebuilt an engine for a guy once. He installed it. He didn't seat the torque converter properly. Calls me up yelling, screaming, cursing me out that I either didn't rebuild the engine or I did a terrible job because the engine's totally locked. And I said, do you really think that I would charge you for an engine rebuild and not bar the engine over by hand? Okay, I barred it over quite a bit by hand because I wanted oil up through the oil pump and distributed through the engine. Because I didn't think he was going to follow my recommendation of disabling the fuel pump or the ignition so that you can crank it for oil pressure before you fire it up. I didn't think he was going to follow that recommendation. He wasn't really a guy that was too big on following instructions. So he didn't seat the torque converter all the way, and he pulled the transmission to the engine with the bolts. And by doing that, he rammed the edges of that torque converter into the pump. And actually got it to seat and bolt up. I don't know how, but somehow it was able to do it without breaking the transmission. It was on an old Nissan Altima, like a 2.4. Can't remember for sure, but anyway, I know I barred the engine over. I knew everything was good. I triple, quadruple checked the timing, and I barred it over probably 100 times with oil in it just to make sure that the oil was drawn up into the oil pump. So I knew he had done something wrong. Anyway, I went over there and I figured it out. I told him to pull the transmission back out and reseat the torque converter, check for damage, reseat the torque converter. And sure enough, he did all that and the car fired up and ran fine. Do you think I ever got an apology? Nope. And if you're watching this video, yes, I'm talking about you, John in Queens. Anyway, let's keep moving on, guys. So we got the torque converter covered, the rear main seal. If you're doing the rear main seal, like I showed you guys the flex plate underneath there. Well, I think I'm going to have to go back underneath. Should have covered that first. But you'll see a ratchet hanging there in the front. When you're torquing those flex plate bolts, going across pattern. And make sure you torque them in multiple passes. So start off real low. Make sure everything is clean too. Start off real low and then work your way up and torque on each pass and do a start pattern. And then mark them. And then to finish up, do a circle pattern. All right. The big thing to remember is when you're tightening down bolts on the back of the engine, even though it looks clockwise to you from here, from the front pulley, it's counterclockwise, and that's going to cause you to jump timing if you do that. So that ratchet is there because my helper was holding that while I torqued these bolts down to prevent it from turning backwards, okay? And every so often, every 3 bolts or 4 bolts, what we did is just rotate the engine clockwise from the front a little bit to make sure we kept the tension on the timing chain. We let the tensioner maintain the slack of the chain. All right, just make sure, don't turn it counterclockwise, okay? Check with your manual, but most engines it's clockwise at the pulley, okay? And you could just easily figure it out by looking at which side your timing chain tensioner is. You want to feed the slack to the side where the tensioner is, okay? So if you think about the engine rotating this way, the slack of the chain is going to go up towards the passenger side, and that's where our tensioner is. All right, so make sure you don't jump timing, you torque your bolts correctly, you install your seal. You may need to put a little dab of silicone in a couple spots back there when you're installing your seal. Follow your manufacturer-specific procedures for that and use your torque specs. Don't ever pull your transmission to the engine with the bolts. Make sure it can seat flush on its own. Make sure your dowels are in place, okay? Another good thing to do, like I said, when you're tightening down the flex plate, even if you're not going to do that, is, make sure that your engine is turning free before you bolt your transmission up. That way you're confident about that. Anything you did right here is good because it's turning free, right? If you put the transmission up and it's not turning free now, then there's an issue right there, okay? So if there's any questions or comments or anything like that, good or bad, I see the bad ones as constructive criticism. Hopefully this helped you guys. If there's anything I may have missed, feel free to leave it in the comments if it's going to help the viewers. Thanks for watching. Be safe out there. Like, subscribe. I appreciate you guys.